Well, welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us and gifting us your time to learn more about silvopasture as a land management practice. My name is Alejandra Hernandez and I'm with the Michael Fields Agricultural Institute. Michael Fields is based in Wisconsin and we work to advance sustainable agriculture through research, policy, and education. I invite you all to type in your name in the chat box below and let us know where you're tuning in from. A couple of housekeeping items. One, can you please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation just to help with audio quality and video quality. Two, we'll be reserving a Q&A portion towards the end of the presentation. And again, if you could please use the chat box to type in any questions for our presenters. And three, we're going to be recording this event and we will be able to provide you a recording and a couple of links to resources after the event. This event is in partnership with the Michael Fields Ag Institute, the Savannah Institute, the Uplands Farmer-Led Watershed Group of Iowa County, Savannah Institute, University of Wisconsin-Madison, Division of Extension, and the Conservation Professional Training Program. And we do a lot of our work with a lot of collaboration, and these are a couple of our sponsors that you're seeing on the screen, co-sponsors that really helped spread the word about this event, so we want to give them a thank you. To give you a little bit of context, the Iowa County Farmer-Led Uplands Watershed Group is a group of farmers that live in this region of southwestern Wisconsin. You can see the map in the screen before you. And so we have farmers and producers. They implement a diversity of practices, and they are bordered by this Wisconsin River. So their practices impact the Wisconsin River that ultimately empties into the Mississippi River. This landscape is very hilly, so you can see the picture with the topography here. And these producers lie within the Mill Creek and Lowry watersheds in northeastern Iowa County, including some watersheds such as the Mute Mill Creek, the Night Hollow Mill Creek, Lowry Creek, and the Rush Creek subwatersheds. These lands were originally home to the Miami, Ho-Chunk, and Meskwaki nations. So for today, we'll be starting with some brief silvopasture presentations. I'll introduce our panelists in a moment, giving us an introduction to silvopasture, giving us the history of the driftless landscape region, and finally giving us farmer perspectives and their journey of incorporating silvopasture as a practice on their own lands. We're going to follow that with a pre-recorded video featuring our awesome Jean Schrieffer, our ag educator for Iowa County, talking about specifically how to use a soil health kit, such as water infiltration and a slake test. And Kevin Erb, the director of the Conservation Professional Training Program, will give us a couple of words about programs that are available for further soil health training. We'll have a couple questions for our speakers and open it up to the rest of the audience. So I'm going to start introducing our panelists today in alphabetical order. First is Michael Dolan. Michael Dolan is the owner and operator of Seven Seeds Farm. He manages a diversified livestock farm, raising and directing grass-fed organic beef, pastured organic pork and chicken, and an establishing silvopasture system, including 12,000 fruit and nut trees. Michael regeneratively manages 600 acres with his family as the seventh generation to take care of the farm in Spring Green, Wisconsin. Keith Keeley. Keith Keeley is the co-executive director of the Savannah Institute, an organization working to advance agroforestry in the Midwest. His own research focus is silvopasture. Keith also co-edited the Driftless Reader, an anthology of the region. Next, we have Daniel Marquardt. He retired in 2011 to the driftless region of Wisconsin after more than 25 years of weekend commutes from Chicago, where he worked as an engineer of architectural structures, deeply committed to the concept that, like architecture, the farming landscape must visually stimulate the imagination. He has taken on a 30-year project to tinker with the idea. Next, we have Diane Mayerfeld. She is a Sustainable Agriculture Coordinator for the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. She helps educators and farmers learn about sustainable agriculture techniques and resources. including grants from the USDA Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, SARE program. She researches Silvopasture in Wisconsin. Next, we have Gene Schrieffer. He is an ag educator outreach specialist with the UW-Madison in southwestern Wisconsin and works in forages and grazing management with dairy, beef, and small ruminant producers. He's an advisor to the Uplands Farmer-led watershed group and has been working in managed grazing for over 40 years. Finally, we have David Zimmern. He and his wife, Anne, are members of the Uplands Watershed Group. They assumed responsibility for the management of the family farm in the driftless area of southwest Wisconsin 8 years ago. Using organic methods, they have gradually transformed the 850-acre cow, calf, and row crop operation to perennial cover, used in an intensive managed grazing system to produce grass-fed, grass-finished beef. Silvopasture plays an important part in the overall management plan. All right, so I'm going to turn it away to Diane to get us started. And welcome to our panelists.
Thank you for that introduction, Alejandra. If you stop share, oh great, that's perfect. Well, this is going to be an interesting challenge to try to do an overview of Silvopasture in 5 to 7 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen right now. All right, so as Alejandra mentioned, I'm with the Division of Extension, and I also work at the Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems. So what is Silvopasture? It's a system that integrates 3 other systems, the trees, the forages that grow on the ground primarily, although forages can also be on trees or on shrubs, and the grazing livestock. And as we'll touch on there, you can have a system where you have maybe cows and trees in the same place, but if you're not managing for all 3 parts of the system, we don't generally consider it silvopasture. And the word comes from the Latin word for forest plus the English word for pasture. Generally, we think about 2 different ways that we can establish silvopasture. We can plant trees in an existing pasture, or we can take an existing woodland, thin that woodland, and plant forages in that area. That oversimplifies things because there's lots of in-betweens. You can take an area, say an old savanna that's become brushy and overgrown, and thin that back. And there are lots of variations on both the planting trees and the thinning trees. But those are the 2 main approaches. Generally, people consider planting trees to be an environmental good all around and a wonderful climate solution. There are a lot more concerns about the environmental and climate impacts of thinning an existing woodland. However, most of the farmers in Wisconsin are primarily interested in thinning an existing woodland, partly because it's a much faster way to establish silvopasture. So why are farmers interested? Based on interviews with farmers and agricultural professionals and foresters in Wisconsin, farmers are interested because silvopasture can improve animal welfare by providing shade on hot, sunny days and providing shelter on cold, windy days. Just in Wisconsin, it can actually reduce your property tax burden. Farmers are interested in getting income from woodland that they otherwise don't get income from. They're interested in getting access to their woods. So there's a lot of concern about woodland being overgrown by invasive shrubs or just being brushy and hard to get through in general. And they're also interested in savanna restoration and habitat restoration in general. And Keith will talk more about that. I should note silvopasture is a long-established practice all over the world, although it also seems very new to us here. So worldwide, part of the reason people do it is because people have been doing it for a long time. Also, having those 3 different systems means you have an additional source of income, either income from the trees in addition to the livestock or income from the livestock in addition to the trees. In many parts of the world, although not here in the upper Midwest, managing an area as silvopasture is seen as a way to reduce fire risk. And there's a lot of interest right now in silvopasture as a strategy to mitigate climate change. So all those great things, why wouldn't everybody do silvopasture everywhere? Well, there are a lot of things that can go wrong. You can get damage to the trees, and first thing that comes to mind is that the livestock can damage the trees. They can trample young trees, they can rub against trees, and also you can damage the trees during logging while you're thinning out your existing stand. Then there's another thing which I hadn't thought about in the beginning, but with a long-lived system like trees, those unexpected weather events can devastate something that you may have put 20 or 50 years into establishing. So this is a photo from northwestern Wisconsin of an area that a farmer had been managing as silvopasture, and then they had these huge winds come in 2019 and devastated it. Devastated a lot of the forest stands in that part of the state. Silvopasture, when you've got trees and your forages on the same site, it creates a lot of increased labor and management challenges. And you have, in many cases, especially if you've converted forest, you don't have the equipment access that helps you reduce that labor. So that can be a really major challenge. Having livestock in a forested area can cause damage to the soils, and you can, even though you can use livestock to reduce brush and invasive shrubs, if you don't manage very carefully, you can have increased shrubs, and you can have toxic species showing up in this woodland area that's where it's harder to keep an eye on the forage. So a couple of management tips. If you're going to convert an existing woodland, we really encourage you to consult a forester before you do it, to make sure that you understand what the economic and environmental resource is that you have there and what the potential for damage could be before you do that conversion. Aim for between 30 and 50% shade by the trees. If you have more shade than that, it's going to be hard. More shade than 50%, you're going to have not very good forage production. If you're clearing out a woodland, you have to have a plan for what to do with the slash, that is the sort of non-timber part of those trees that come down. In the upper picture, you can see the big piles, which is commonly what people do, is they move all that woody debris into piles so that they can plant the forage elsewhere. Plant shade tolerant forages as soon as possible to prevent the undesirable species from establishing themselves. So in the bottom picture, it's a little hard to see, but this is from my research plot. On the right, you see the silvopasture area where I did plant forages, and it's primarily grass. On the left is the sort of grazed woods treatment where we thinned the area, and a lot of ground cover came in, but some of it was species we didn't want. Milkweed is, which as you can see there, is not a good forage species unless you happen to be a monarch butterfly. And we had some toxic species like pokeweed and white snake root come in. So plant those species you want as soon as possible. Flash graze, and I've used the term flash, which is not a usual term we use, just to emphasize these wooded areas are even more sensitive, and typically the forage takes longer to recover. So take those rotational grazing principles and ratchet them up a notch. And then finally, these are, at least here in the upper Midwest, these are systems that we are still learning about. And you have to know what your goals are so that you can manage for those goals, but you also have to prepare to be flexible and keep monitoring the site and keep on adapting as the situation requires. So this was just a lightning overview. I have my email here. Alejandra is going to tell us at the end how to get to a longer list of silvopasture resources, but there are a lot of resources available. And with that, I think I will turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you so much. Next, we have Keith.
Here we go.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Keith Keeley. I see some familiar names and faces here, so it's really wonderful to be able to gather virtually with all of you. Appreciate you being here and your interest in Silvopasture. I wanted to say, since this is about more than just animals in the woods, that this morning when my 3-year-old woke up, it was more animals and more than just the woods. She told me that in her dreams there were animals dancing in her bedroom. So there was a giraffe and a porcupine and a hedgehog and a rhinoceros and a hippopotamus and Mr. Moose playing the tuba, which woke her up. So I thought that might be good to share, that silvopasture can be more than just in the woods too. They could be in your bedroom. So in the next 5 to 7 minutes here, I want to tell you about 12,000 years of history and 24,000 square miles in the driftless area. And so obviously will be kind of an overview, but hopefully seed some of the discussion for later on too. And of course, the place to start is in Spain. This photograph you see here is of an area called the Dehesa. And this is an indigenous land use system of agriculture, silvopasture, where cork oak trees are grown widely spaced. Cattle graze and sheep graze on the grass. Hogs are finished on the acorns, and that produces jamón ibérico, which is one of the most valuable types of ham in the world. And then any cork for wine bottles is harvested from this type of trees as well. So this is a ancient silvopasture system that continues into the present day. And I think helps me in terms of imagining what the driftless landscape may have looked like at one point and could look like in the future. This is a map of the driftless area that shows the degree of slope in the landscape. And so you can see, compared to the rest of the Midwest, the driftless, the bright area, is much steeper in terms of the slope of the land. And because of this, and because of agricultural uses that are not appropriate to that slope of land, this is a photograph from the 1930s and shows some of the catastrophic erosion at that time. We still deal with a lot of erosion in the landscape. And silvopasture, and I think grazing generally, in my mind, in the minds of many others, I think you'll hear from today, it's a way of approaching how do we do agriculture on this landscape in a way that doesn't spoil it for generations to come. And so looking back, these are models of vegetation or land cover. And the one on the left is from public land surveying records in the 1830s and 40s of the same blob, 24,000 square miles in the driftless area. And the thing to point out here is that the red color is oak savanna. And you'll hear a little bit more about what oak savanna is through the course of these presentations, but it's essentially a mix between a forest and a prairie ecosystem, unique in its own right, where different species of oak trees, especially bur oak, are the dominant type of tree, and there's lots of grass and forbs and shrubs in between for large mammals to graze and browse on. And in the 1830s and 40s, prior to European settlement, that's what most of this landscape was, 70% or so. And then on the right, this is a contemporary land use map, and there's no category for savanna. It's essentially gone. It's all gone to cultivated crops or pasture or grown up into forest. And so it's worth recognizing that for 12,000 years or more or so, the people who lived here had a rich history of land use in ways that landscape was intentionally managed for many things, but among them to improve the grazing and browsing for large mammals that were a part of the food system and culture. And so there's much, much more there than I could include in 5 minutes, but this is a great book if you want to learn more on the topic, called 12 Millennia. This map I also won't discuss in detail, but this shows the removals, relocations, and return, some of them in broad strokes, of the Ho-Chunk tribe, which was native and remains native to much of the driftless area. And this is to say that there's a reason why we don't see savanna and that model for silvopasture in the landscape today. But we do see it in some places. This is the area known as the former Badger Army ammunition area, which is near Sauk City, just up the Wisconsin River from where many of the farms you'll hear from today are. And about 700 acres of this land was returned to the Ho-Chunk Nation in the last generation. And they're I don't know the details of it and won't presume, of course, to speak for the nation or the members of it, but there's discussion of returning bison to this landscape, and it's being managed with fire in a way that restores savanna. And so a type of silvopasture, you might say. So this is what much of the savannas and the driftless look like today. And this will be familiar with anyone who's walked in the woods in this region. These wolf trees, they're sometimes called, or these ancient oaks with lower branches that have died back but were stretched out horizontally, indicating that as that tree matured, it grew up in the open without other trees around it. And you can tell there's no other big trees around a tree like this, but rather younger trees that have grown up since fire isn't there anymore and large grazing animals aren't there anymore either. And where's my... This is an area I'll just mention where we did some work to clear out an old savanna and planted some forages. And in the areas where we planted forages, the invasive shrubs, buckthorn and black locust and multiflora rose were kept down, were kept back by the beef cattle. In areas where we didn't plant anything, those things resprouted abundantly. So it's and this is part of a larger project working on farms to test this out. And you'll hear more about it from some of the other farmers too. But the point here is that this is not as simple as just putting the animals back in the woods, but there's a lot of management interventions and context specificity depending on what are you starting with. And I'll just show a short video. You'll hear about some goats, but what you might not hear from other farms, this is a device called a fecon, or a forestry mower mulcher. And we broadcast seeds before this machine came through. And one of the challenges is getting seeds to germinate when you have a lot of leaf litter and woody debris. And so this machine also helped plant the seeds essentially by packing them into the ground. Not appropriate in every context, but for certain management interventions that can be very helpful. I have some slides here of our next speaker's farm, Michael Dolan. Won't steal his thunder too much here, but just show you, we did some trials as well on planting trees into open pasture, which when you're talking about climate change and how do we get more atmospheric carbon in our landscapes, planting trees into open pastures is where that possibility is really strong. But then how do you get those trees to grow without the animals eating them? So we tried a few things that didn't work and some things that worked but were pretty expensive and painful, and had a lot of help along the way. And Michael, I understand you've got some more help on the way too, but I'll let you talk about that as much as you want to. So these are some data from those different trials. But I don't have time to get into that, but just to let you know, we can discuss that more if you want to. I'll also give a plug for this book, Silvopasture, which is really great introduction to the topic by Steve Gabriel. And then a couple other books that are also shameless plugs. Savannah Institute has a book on planting tree crops that includes a chapter on livestock integration, and that's a free PDF you can get on our website, or you can order a hard copy. And then our book on the driftless area as well, which includes lots of great voices besides just listening to me. So with that, I'll pass it on to Michael. And thanks again to everyone for your attention and the opportunity to be a part of this.
Thank you so much, Keith. And next we'll have Michael Dolan.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Michael Dolan from Seven Seeds Farm. I've got my wife here, Chloe, as well, very pregnant. And we manage Seven Seeds Farm together. It's Seven Seeds Farm because I'm the 7th generation to take over the farm. So it's been in my family since the 1800s. And we focus on raising grass-fed organic beef, pastured organic pork, as well as pastured organic chicken in a silvopasture environment. In 2015, I graduated from college, the University of Iowa, with a chemistry major. And I came back home with some lucrative ideas about how to farm. And I decided to plant over 12,000 fruit and nut trees in my 70 acres of the home farm here. And mainly chestnuts, hazelnuts, apples, pears, pecans, just anything that I thought would grow and anything that I thought was tasty in the future that I might like. I purchased a tree planter, and we use mainly bare root stock trees. We had the best luck with bare root stock. And on the picture on the right, we have a picture of after the tree planter went through. And we would just have to tamp the trees in, no watering, very, very minimal work to get them established. And then after that, to protect them from livestock, we put up a one-strand poly wire on each side. And we actually were alley cropping. So the trees are on 80-foot contours. So we're alley cropping in between the rows of trees. And we picked chestnuts as our main deciduous tree. And we did that because chestnuts are a little more reliable producing than oaks. They flower in June as opposed to oaks flower earlier in the year. So they're more reliable, and it turns out the chestnuts grow in these little clusters surrounded by these really spiky balls that actually really hurt if you pick them up with your bare hands. And so here's a time-lapse video of Seven Seeds Farm in 2015, 2016. Keith helped me put this together, and I look forward to it continuing on in the future. And you'll notice two different types of land management. Right ahead of us, we are like cutting hay and doing some cropping, and then in the background you'll see the movement of livestock because we rotate animals daily. We're managing the grass with livestock. And you'll see the tree growth going on here, going through winter. Spreading manure right in front, and then cattle grazing in the back, and ending on a crop of corn that gets too tall so you can't see anything else. But we did that to renovate this pasture, and it's back in pasture now. So now we'll have some better views for the future. So here are two of our Silvopasture systems. The system on the left is what I call Silvopasture by addition, where we added trees into tillable ground that didn't have any trees, and we incorporate the livestock with them when they get big enough. And then on the right is what I call Silvopasture by subtraction. So we took a stand of walnut and cedars, thinned out all the cedar trees, and planted a perennial cover underneath, and maintained that perennial cover with beef cow-calf pairs. I personally prefer Silvopasture by addition. It's a lot simpler to manage, and as you can see here again, Silvopasture by addition is on the left, Silvopasture by subtraction is on the right, and it's just a little more, it's more of a challenge to control the weeds on the steeper slopes and where you can't get machines in and stuff like that. And so you can check us out, sevenseedsorganicfarm.com, Facebook, Instagram, and yeah, look forward to answering any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Yeah, and as a reminder, we'll reserve some questions for the Q&A. We started to get some, so thank you for that. Next, we'll have David Zimmern give his presentation. Welcome, David.
Okay, well, thanks for inviting me to talk a little bit, Alejandra. And I couldn't be farther from Michael Dolan in description, although he's almost our neighbor. I'm a beginner farmer. I'm not a seventh generation farmer, but about 8 years ago, Ann and I took over responsibility for her family farm, actually. and decided to change over from a cow-calf row crop operation to continuous perennial cover. And as part of that, we did some projects that would qualify for Silvopasture, as we have just heard it defined. I chose one, and it's actually quite different than Michael's. And I'm going to get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts of it. It's going to be brief, and I can answer any questions later if anybody's interested, but I just will show you basically what we did. Can everybody see my screen? I guess yes.
Yes.
Okay. So this is a project that began in 2016. I wrote to 2020. It's actually continuing. Silvopasture, I think, is a never-ending project, and we'll see that. So let me give you a background. What we're talking about is about 10 acres of bottomland. Through the middle of it, or through it, runs a spring-fed stream, which is a tributary of Mill Creek. Mill Creek, for those who don't know, empties into the Wisconsin River, which empties into the Mississippi, which everyone knows empties into the Gulf of Mexico. So, you know, we feel responsible for quite a bit, as does the Michael Fields Institute that we work with. Anyway, this area had been grazed by a dairy herd, but about, I wrote 30, it's actually more like 25 years ago, the dairy ceased to exist and the land was abandoned. And there was a path through it, so you can get through it. But what it had grown up in are a lot of things, including honeysuckle, multiflora rose, Russian olive, box elders, middle-aged dying elm trees, and several windstorms, including a tornado, which really turns an area into something you don't really want to see and not very useful. But in addition, as time went on, a lot of black walnut grew in there. There's some scattered oak and hickory, and grass was growing on the mowed path. So it looked like it had some potential. So our goals for this were pasture for our beef cattle, and also to stabilize the stream banks and the stream itself to try and improve water quality downstream from us. I have a picture here of the second year. I would put a picture of the first year, except you couldn't see anything. What you'd see from the road or any place else you stood in this pasture was just a wall of brush. I mean, you could take a picture, but take a picture of any wall of brush, and you've seen this before. So I had no idea, truthfully, what the terrain was. I didn't even know where the stream ran for most of it. You just couldn't get in there. So we were fortunate, or are fortunate, to have some neighbors who raise goats. Some people in the audience know Sherry Nolden and Alan Philo, and they had some goats. And in fact, that brush mess to most of us is a brushy mess. To a goat, it is dinner. So what they did is they brought their goats in one year using electronet fencing and a couple of livestock guardian dogs, sent the goats through in a series of paddocks and ate a lot of the brush. In addition, Alan would come along and cut down the box elders little by little. And in fact, one of the more interesting things is a box elder tree becomes like a dinner bell. If you bring a chainsaw and start the chainsaw up, the entire goat herd will run to the chainsaw because they know that a box elder is coming down that they could eat. It actually was a remarkable thing to watch. But by the second year, you could actually see something. So the second year, I have a little video of what those goats were doing. So there were more than 100 goats. I think each year was different, but each year there were more than 100 goats. And there's the electronet fencing. There's the road that actually existed the whole time with grass growing along it. And just a brief look at a interesting set of a herd of goats that were our workmen. So anyway, the goats did their work. However, what you're left with each year after the goats do their work and after we do our work with the chainsaws, cutting down the trees, is you end up with a mess. and we ended up with a mess. So you can see our skid steer back here in the grapple bucket. And in the winter, we'd go out there with some help, a lot of help actually, and pick up and move as much of the woody debris as we could, pile it up, burned it. Next year, piled up what was more, the more of it, burned it. And by spring of 2018, we fenced the area and began grazing cattle through here quickly. Actually, it would be less than 3 days in any one spot. But the cattle would come through and really do a great job of trampling the stuff you don't want, trampling some of the stuff you do want, but in this area, there wasn't much trampleable that we wanted. And then for you machinery fans, we have another neighbor, Les Evans, who's got this big machine. It's an excavator with a specialized claw. And I want to show you how this thing works. I found this to be amazing. That claw digs up the stumps, because with the stumps in place, you can't mow. You can mow, which it's really hard to mow around a whole bunch of stumps. And what he would do is ride through here in the winter. The ground was fairly frozen. Pull up the stumps, cover over the holes, and you think, well, now that's great. We don't have any stumps, but we still have stumps because those stumps are just laying there, getting in the way of anything we're going to do. And the next winter, we've got our skid steer back out, now clearing stumps, piling them up, and burning them. So now we're on year 4, and we're getting somewhere. We've actually grazed it. We've got a fence. We've got some open land. And I want to show you these pictures about that sort of lead to the understanding of the stream bank stabilization. When a box elder grows along the edge of a stream, what it tends to do is fall over. That's what box elders do. They fall over. And when they fall over, they pull out the side of the stream, and that side of the stream ends up in the Gulf of Mexico sooner or later. All that dirt and the runoff that goes with it. But what you can see in this picture is right here, there's still some bare ground. There was probably a big honeysuckle in here that was shading the ground. And that's what they do. The ground sees essentially no light, and therefore you can't grow any forage there. But you can see along the edge of the stream, now grass is starting to grow along the edge. And this grass has gradually expanded to more. And this is, I don't know if that's exactly the same place. It's pretty close, where you can see the grass is now grown up to the stream. This side is actually really steep. We left this as forest because you actually can't even get there. It's so steep and you can't cross the stream and there's no way to it. But you can see on this side, all this grass has grown in really nicely. So there are areas that have grown really nice grass just because of the seed bank that's in there, and we've opened up the light. We were able to mow once we got the stumps out. But the next thing we did, and this was late last summer, actually in the fall, I guess, of 2020, you can see we have big round hay bales laid out in an area where if you look at the ground, you can't see it very well, but this is not grass. This is weeds that was under thicker canopy, and we didn't get much in the way of grass regrowth. So what we did is we put the cattle in here with very little in the way of forage growing, and the cattle then stand around these bales, as anyone who's had cattle knows, and really trample things down to almost nothing. And really do a number on trampling the weeds. And what we'll do this spring, or actually the winter, probably in March, is frost seed that area with the kinds of forage that we want in there, the grasses and the brassica and forbs combination that we want on that ground. And that trampling, we've done this in other areas, that trampling tends to work to allow that to take root and grow really nicely, especially since the trees and the brush above it are thinned. And then coming up this summer and for the foreseeable future, we'll be doing, as Diane talked about, flash grazing through here, hopefully a couple times a year, mostly in the driest part of the year. We want to keep them out of the stream as best we can. We found that managed grazing, I think, works better for stream bank stabilization than does stream bank fencing, which allows all the brush that you don't want to grow inside the fence. We tried that elsewhere once, didn't work, I don't think, very well, but flash grazing using an intensive managed system with polywire fencing, I think works great for stabilizing stream banks. We get really nice grass growth. That is what I wanted to tell you guys. I can answer questions later, and I'll turn it over to Daniel.
Thank you, David. Daniel, if you could share your screen.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity. This is a photo of this farm taken about 1908, more than 100 years ago. I'm including it here to help you understand the hillsides. Take a careful look at these slopes and how open all of this land was in the more than 100 years ago. And this is an aerial photo taken 1937. This is the homestead. This is a ridge we call a hog's back. So there's probably 140, 50 feet of difference in elevation between here and here. So please notice there are fences here, fences like this. And so this area was too steep to farm. It was obviously grazed, and these fencing was hog wire, suggesting sheep, hogs, of course, cattle. This is what it looked like when we bought the farm in 2011. This is that hog's back. And as you can see, this is filled in with brush, basically. These crops, these areas used to be cropped annually. As you can see, it's been abandoned. This is mostly honeysuckle. This is what it looks like literally yesterday. This is that abandoned woodland in a neighbor's property. And then this is that Savannah zone that we've been working on to clear. This is the first summer we grazed. You can notice some of these mature oak trees towering above a lower canopy here and here. But for the most part, it's cropped with, it's very closely spaced, mostly hickory and so forth, smooth bark hickory, growing very close to each other and small in diameter. Some of these areas were quite open and brushy, but we could just clean these areas up with the skid steer. We've not done any burning, but I'm looking forward to doing it. This is over here, as you can see, where I had not mowed. That's what it looked like when we walked in there. Most of the woodland, abandoned woodland, looked like this. As you can see, you can't get in there in the wintertime, let alone the summertime. And as David was saying, it's impenetrable. There's hog wire right here beyond this cow. There's a cow licking off a new calf. And this is how we started opening up in 2013. So just firewood and brush piles. Here you can see some of those more mature oaks. Right here we were spreading, I think just put down annual rye the first summer just to stabilize things. But then later we came in with perennial grasses. A dark photo, but you can get the idea. This is the neighboring property back here, and here's that oak tree you saw in the last photo. This is the first summer we put cattle in there. And as you can see, that there's an electric fence here in the front replacing the hog wire. This is what that area looks like in the wintertime. We feed cattle by rolling out bales of hay on the ground. This is what it looks like in the summertime. We're up on the ridge now and we're looking back toward the north. Return to this photo quickly. This is the area that I'm working on right now. This is our current project. It's about 7 acres, a strip like this. Notice that there's a pond put in there with help from the federal government done by the prior owner. Also, just real quickly, notice the contours in 1937. Henry Wallace, some progress in farming techniques, but generally, this is how it looks like this is looking back toward the west now. So there's a hog wire fence in here that we removed. There's Linda harvesting hog wire and whatnot. Fortunately, I don't have time to talk about all my mistakes, but there's one. I'll let you guess. which one. You can probably see more than one. We've also been very attentive to making walking trails for pedestrians and also for farm vehicles. So there will be an electric fence that goes along in here, and the cattle will get into this Savannah area, but in a really controlled manner. This is more, this is kind of the brutal method. It's not David and Ann's more deliberate grazing, browsing goats. Unfortunately, I don't have their patience. Now, David was mentioning the stumps and the problem, and you get root balls like this. This is hackberry. It's very densely fine roots and very heavy. So what we did was we separate these root balls from the trunks and basically put them in landfill. That's the only way I could really figure to use them. So using a dump trailer, we hauled the stumps up a grade up around another 100 feet or so in elevation, and then dumped them here and just created a landfill. This is very, very steeply sloped landscape right here. So we dump the stumps and with this little tractor, push them forward. And this is what the stumps, I think this is that double hackberry you just saw. So we just pushed them over the edge, and then this is a combination of topsoil and debris from a burn pile. And we had some big burn piles. That was the mistake I was referring to earlier. So we hauled this topsoil up to the top of the ridge, and you can see there's piles of topsoil here, and here are the stumps. And so with a skid steer, I just push these forward and then cover them with the topsoil. I think if you see the slope here, you can appreciate how much material went in here, but also how many stumps I could disappear. So running a little late, so I'm gonna just thank everybody for your attention and turn it over to who's next, Jean?
Yes, I will be sharing a preview of the pre-recorded video that features Jean, our ag educator, performing a soil health kit, using the soil health kit. So I'll show that in a minute. And I'll cut it short.
Hello, I'm Gene Schrieffer, ag educator with University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. I'm out in Iowa County, and I work with the local watershed group. And today we are demonstrating some of the tools that are included in the soil health test kit. And this is an old piece of irrigation pipe. It's about 6 inches in diameter. We're going to insert this in the soil approximately half the distance, so about 3 inches or so. Because it's made out of aluminum, we also give you a high quality block of wood. And with this, we're going to put that on top and then also have a rubber mallet, which will allow you to pound that into the soil to the appropriate depth without bunging up this edge and painting that over. So I've put that in as evenly as I possibly can, and I've pulled out some of the excess debris inside the infiltration ring. So we've got our ring here. Then we have to add the equivalent of about 1 inch of water. Now, we've recently had rain. If we haven't had rain in the last few days, we would normally wet this first and allow that to sink in. Once there's no more water present, then we're going to measure and time that second application of water. So for 6 inches, 1 inch in a 6 inch circle translates into about 444 milliliters. And I've got it marked. I can see that on my graduated cylinder, but that's how much water is the equivalent of 1 inch in a 6 inch ring. Now we're going to and we are at 444 milliliters. Now, one of the things that we also do, besides removing debris, is we're going to just put a small piece of plastic wrap. This is also in your kit. And this is to really, we're trying to get a true measurement of what it might be for rainfall. We don't want to disturb the soil by dumping this in very hard or very fast, because that might disturb the soil and influence the rate of infiltration rate. So we're going to put this in gently, remove that, and then we're going to have a stopwatch. Our water infiltration test begins by dumping that in, 440 milliliters in that 6-inch diameter. And then we're going to pull that and then hopefully quickly turn on the stopwatch. And we're going to say stop. See that entire 1-inch equivalent of water infiltrate. We're going to call this done. So I'm going to hit stop. And what we're looking for is where we can see that the soil surface is kind of wet and glistening. There shouldn't be any pools or puddles of water. In this particular case, we're showing about 5 minutes and 21 seconds for that water infiltration rate. So we could take that information and we could actually calculate what an inch per hour rate would be. In this case, I haven't done the calculations, but my guess is this is going to turn out to be about 5 to 6 inches per hour. And a water infiltration rate, which should take care of most of our bigger storms. It's not going to take care of our 17-inch rainfall, but this farm is going to capture and store a lot more water than one that might take 10, 15, 20 minutes. And I've seen some where the water hasn't infiltrated after 25 minutes with just a single inch of water. So more infiltration rate is good. This will depend on your soil type and as well as your management. So sands inherently drain faster. We're on a silty loam soil here today with a clay subsoil. This is really a great soil for holding water and giving up water for crops. And it has a moderately good water infiltration rate.
All right, I'm going to stop share, and we will send out a link to the rest of the video for you all to see. And we are running close to time, but just want to let you know that we will be staying a little bit longer for a little bit of Q&A. And I'll have Kevin Erb now connects the dots between silvopasture and water infiltration and the type of soil health trainings that are offered.
Oh, thank you very much, Alejandra, and everybody else for being with us. And I will mention to the speakers real quickly that there are a few questions. Many of them have scrolled up a little ways here, but if you can be looking at those and typing answers into the chat, that would be appreciated. So when we look at this whole issue of silvopasture, we look at the more intense rainfalls that we've been getting over the last decade or so. I think that there's a misconception out there that cattle compact the soil, water doesn't infiltrate, and pastures, combining pastures and woods are bad. And I think that the key thing really is that it has to be properly managed. And it's not just a matter of putting an electric fence around the 5-acre woods and throwing 75 cattle in there and seeing what happens. It's really a matter of planning things out and thinking in advance, this is how to do it properly. And so what Jean's video demonstrates is really kind of looking at, you know, you can go in there before you do something, you go in there after, and you can get a reasonable comparison of what the changes are. Now, ideally, I'd like to do it the same day and 10 feet apart in an area that I've done something to, compare it to an area that I haven't done anything to. But the reality is that when we look at improving soil health, properly managing livestock, and properly managing the pasture and the woodland is critical. And so as part of that, Extension has funding through the DNR's 9 Key Element Watershed Program in that uplands area in Iowa County, including Munt Creek, Knights Hollow. to do not only soil health training, but provide landowners in and around those watersheds with a soil health test kit as well. And what you can see here are some of the components. We include a compaction probe. We include that infiltration test that Jean just demonstrated, the slake test, which we cut out of the video today due to time. We felt it was more important to listen to the farmers and their experiences than to watch a video that you can watch here later. So we do have that available, and you can either get a hold of that if you're in those target watersheds, either by attending one of the classes, which we'll be doing in the field here once the pandemic situation is eased. But we also have 4 free online soil health trainings. And no matter where you are in the country, these are free and available to you. And so if you've got an interest in any of these, I would encourage you to put your name and email in the chat and let us know, and we'll get you information out there on that as well. So like I said, if you're interested in the online courses or the face-to-face when we get back to those, definitely put your email and name in the chat. You can also reach out directly to me. And with that, Alejandro, what I'm going to do is 2 things. I'm going to start a series of polls here. The first one is going to be asking you, based on what happened today, do you think you'll make any changes in your management? Do you want to learn more? And so if you can take just a couple of minutes to fill out the things here on the screen, and that would be very helpful to us as we plan moving things forward. And I'll let that go here for a couple of moments, and then I'll put up a second one that helps us collect our required demographic information that we need to provide to our funders on this as well. So with that, I'm going to let the polls continue to go, but I'm also going to turn things back over to any of our speakers. If they have any comments that they want to add coming out of today based on the questions in the chat. Otherwise, the participants, you're more than welcome to type any questions that you want to into the chat box as well.
All right, thank you, Kevin. And I do have a couple questions that came up earlier for any of the speakers to answer. And one of them is, where did you purchase your trees? If you're implementing silvopasture, I guess this is Michael Dolan question, where did you purchase your trees?
Yeah, I did put that in the chat, but we did purchase a lot through Savannah Institute's bulk tree buying program. They sell mainly bare rootstock, and then we did purchase some starts from Badger Set Research, which we didn't have as much luck with.
Okay.
I'll just jump in to say that we have discontinued for now anyway our bulk plant buying program, but if people are interested in the nurseries that we worked with, I'm happy to provide those. You can contact me via our website.
Great, thank you. Another question is, what type of annual and perennial forages are considered tolerant to shade?
Well, as I typed into the chat earlier, the most we planted a mix of species in our site, kind of to see which one would do best, and with a fair bit of shade, orchard grass definitely did best. That said, if you keep it to 50% shade or less, I think you could probably also do well with fescues, especially meadow fescue, and the perennial ryegrass might do all right. We still need more research on what does well on different soils in our area and different shade levels.
All right. Another question is, Diane, earlier you were sharing a couple of tips of what to consider if you're trying to pursue silvopasture, and you're like, ask a forester, think about what to do with slash, etc. A question for all of you, all of our speakers, what are questions that went through your mind when you were establishing goals? If you could share some of those questions that you asked yourself when you were establishing your goals for your system. Would anyone like to share?
Well, I'll jump in. And part of the reason why I said you have to be clear about your goals is, in the previous slide, there were a lot of different goals. that farmers mentioned. And you kind of, my point was, yeah, each different goal needs slightly different management. So if your priority is animal welfare, you're going to manage the site slightly differently than if your priority is to maximize the timber harvest ultimately. So, and basically on my research site, again, and this is just one site, one set of things that we investigated over a few years. The biggest benefits we saw were to animal welfare, definitely having access to shade. The cows liked using that. And they seemed, even though they were cool summers, to experience less heat stress. And any farmer will know, if you give livestock the choice to go to shade on a hot sunny day, they will take it, which indicates that they value that. But depending on your site, I mean, I think what we heard from David and Daniel is that for both of them, it seemed like having access, opening up this part of their land that they couldn't use, sounded like that was an important goal, and a goal that they could then align with habitat restoration, if I interpret what they said. And with Michael, what I heard was adding diversity and really aiming for those environmental outcomes of turning the farm into a perennial cover. But that's just what I heard from their presentations.
Absolutely. I mean, my goal was diversity 100%, and diversity of cash flow, diversity of species, and the biggest thing was creating as many symbiotic relationships out there as much as possible.
Awesome, thank you. We have another question in the chat box. Candy says, I'm from Southwest Iowa, and most of the ecological sites use native warm season grass with tree canopy. Why wouldn't you use a combination of WSG and CSG, I'm not sure what they mean, as a forage instead of introduced non-native grass, many of which, like brome and fescue, do not make relationships with AMF? Warm season grass, cool season grass. Thank you, Marty. I don't know if anyone can speak to this question.
And I'm guessing AMF means arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. So I'm gonna, Keith, you can jump in while I'm reading the question.
Sure, I can say we did try to do that in one of our trials. We had a lot of challenges getting the warm season grasses established. For folks who've done that, they take longer to get going, and so they're much more sensitive to weed pressure. Once they're established, they're very competitive. They are more sensitive to overgrazing as well. So I would say the main limitation is that it's a management challenge, an establishment challenge. And if you can get there and that's your goal, that's your objective, I think there certainly is a lot of rationale for that, especially if Savannah habitat restoration is one of your goals and benefits to wildlife, et cetera. And warm season grasses offer potentially a way to have more forage available during some of the droughty parts of the year as well. But maybe others who have experience with grazing and establishing warm season grasses can speak to that. But it was difficult for us to get them established, especially in an active pasture setting.
All right.
Yeah, I think Keith covered that very well. 30 years of this, of people trying to put the warm season and cool season together in Wisconsin. Nobody so far has successfully done that. That doesn't mean we should give up, but cool season grasses in a Wisconsin environment, we're cool, very wet in the springs. It has such a huge advantage to having that head start over warm season that it often outcompetes it unless we introduce fire. So what we see is you get one or the other. Managing them in the same paddock is just really difficult based on what we know at this point.
Thank you, Jean. And everyone, type in your questions in the chat box, but I want to ask the panelists if they want to add any words that they weren't able to include in your presentation or cover in your presentation. So if you guys want to expand on any of your points.
I do want to give one shout out. This is maybe related to the warm season grasses and native grasses, to some of our native shrubs in the Midwest and in the driftless area. We have a lot of wonderful native shrubs that can be a part of pasture systems too. They, I think, get a bad rap because they can shade out grasses, and a lot of the weedy brush that we deal with can look similar. For example, wild plums are a wonderful part of landscape and to have in a pasture system even, but they look a lot like European buckthorn. It's easily to get them mixed up. So, you know, when you have biological and ecological diversity as part of your goals, it's not always easy to manage around shrubs. If, you know, like David was describing, you need to get a mower in there to clip weeds. But if you're trying to do more nuanced habitat restoration, I encourage people to look at brush with a more discerning eye and not just call all brush bad, but to distinguish between native and invasive shrubs.
So I did have something that I wanted to mention, and that is the issue of oak wilt. We did a project before this project in which we worked in the, I guess, late spring, and we're not careful about the oak trees. And if you nick an oak tree with your skid steer or anything else at the wrong time of year, you'll get oak wilt, or at least around here you'll get oak wilt. And it not only kills the tree quickly that you nicked, it kills all the trees that are sharing a root space with that tree. So we lost a whole row of oak trees by not being careful. We've been extraordinarily careful since then. It hasn't happened again, but oak wilt is something that you should really pay attention to when you do this. And the other thing is we also have done pasture, trying to add trees into pasture. We had a tornado that took out most of our trees in the pastures, and we were trying to get some more trees back in. And if anybody wants to see all the ways you can build a fence around a tree that a cow will knock over, I have all kinds of mistakes.
Thank you for bringing that up, David. And I just want to also mention, just generally, the silvopasture by subtraction, there are a lot of things you have to pay attention to during the thinning part. So also if the logger comes, there's a silvopasture site that in northeastern Wisconsin where their logger came in the spring when the soils were wet and just did a huge amount of damage to their farm roads and to the soils. So it's fast, but there are a lot of cautions, and oak wilt is definitely an important one.
All right.
And just to emphasize, the main way to avoid that is to not do any cutting or nicking, like David says, between April and July. And you can, you know, to be cautious, just don't do it anytime there's green leaves on the trees.
Another question I got through text is lessons, if you can share lessons on how to protect young trees. Any lessons learned?
So as Keith mentioned before, we did a couple trials on it. We used single strand poly wire, we use the tree tubes, and we use these little arbor shields that are sort of like, I don't know, wire that are prickly if the cattle try and touch them. For the amount of trees that we did, what worked best was the single strand electric, as well as the single strand electric with the tree tubes. You get so much more growth using the tree tubes. It creates a little microclimate in there, and it really stimulates a lot of growth. So that's what we found.
Right, thank you. And so I'm dropping the link to the Uplands Watershed group, and I'll be uploading the link to the Zoom recording, to the soil health kit video, and the list of resources that our panelists shared with us today. Thank you so much for going over time with us, and we had such a delight just spending time with you talking about this topic. And thank you so much for spending this time, to our panelists who really dedicated a lot of work to making this happen. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alejandra.
Thank you, Alejandra.
And we'll have the speakers stay on for a couple minutes after, just to debrief if we need to.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.